Saludos, bienvenidos una vez más a otra edición especial de su programa OpenMic Florida. Como ustedes saben, ya todos los miércoles a esta hora 5 de la tarde, aquí en la ciudad de Kissimmee, condado de Osceola, pues le traemos a ustedes todas las incidencias que tienen que ver con el acontecer del estado de la Florida, tanto en el ámbito político como en el ámbito social, como en el ámbito general. Así que en el día de hoy tenemos un invitado muy especial.
Networktv, a puro merengue, salsa, bachata y música urbana. Viernes 11 de octubre, desde República Dominicana, la pureza del merengue, Julio César. Desde Venezuela, el cantante de la salsa, Alex Rey. La bachata impresionante de Vibrato, el Boys. Los urbanos, acá, la leyenda. Llama 787, Aaron, el del traje de metal, el Luni, Elvin y Jared, Jay Químico, Hincho, el rústico, Calibre, la nota musical, Mir Hippo, la presión y muchos más. Viernes 11 de octubre en el Sol on the Beach, la discoteca más grande y elegante de la Florida Central, en el Old Town de Kissimmee, a partir de las 7 de la noche. 30 aniversario del periódico El Sol de la Florida y 7º aniversario del canal digital El Sol Networktv, y tú tienes que estar ahí. Vuélvele.
Saludos, bienvenidos una vez más a otra edición especial de su programa OpenMic Florida. Como ustedes saben, ya todos los miércoles a esta hora 5 de la tarde, aquí en la ciudad de Kissimmee, condado de Osceola, pues le traemos a ustedes todas las incidencias que tienen que ver con el acontecer del estado de la Florida, tanto en el ámbito político como en el ámbito social, como en el ámbito general. Así que en el día de hoy tenemos un invitado muy especial que quiero compartir con ustedes y que escuchen de él en breve. Ahí van a tener también que activar su condición bilingüe porque vamos a hacer la entrevista en inglés. Pero antes quiero pues recordarles que el próximo 11 de octubre ya tenemos todo preparado, ya eso está ahí, ese es el próximo viernes a partir de las 7 de la noche en un club, en un centro nocturno aquí de la ciudad de Kissimmee, en el downtown de Kissimmee, Sol on the Beach. Ustedes lo conocen aquí en el Old Town de Kissimmee. Vamos a pasarlo en grande. Tenemos un fiestón súper especial, un fiestón en grande con varias orquestas. Tenemos sobre todo a la pureza del merengue que viene con una orquesta completa para compartir con todos nosotros esa noche. Estamos celebrando el 30 aniversario del periódico El Sol de la Florida y el 7º aniversario de nuestro canal El Sol Networktv. Así que luzcan bonito, vístanse bien, porque vamos a pasarla súper especial y en grande el próximo viernes, no este, sino el próximo de la próxima semana, 11 de octubre a partir de las 7 de la noche. Manténgase atento a todo lo que ocurre en el canal porque vamos a estar dando muchas informaciones importantes. Ese día también hay muchas sorpresas. Ese día vamos a transmitir en vivo, completamente en vivo, vía nuestra plataforma de RokuTV, el Sol Networktv y todas las redes sociales. Así que esperamos que ustedes pues se den cita, no nos fallen, que la vamos a pasar súper bien. Eso es el próximo viernes 11 de octubre. Les recordamos también que muchas personas nos preguntan por dónde salimos, si estamos en Facebook, si estamos en YouTube. Nosotros salimos por toda parte. Nuestra plataforma principal es RokuTV, pero también salimos por Facebook, salimos por YouTube, salimos por Twitch, salimos prácticamente por todas las redes. O sea, así que es fácil de usted encontrarnos a nosotros. Y si no, pues entre también a nuestra página, elsolnetworktv.com. Ahí también puede accesar a ver nuestro programa OpenMic Florida y todo lo que acontece en el Sol Networktv. Otra forma, bueno, baje la aplicación. Sí, tenemos una aplicación tanto para Android como para los teléfonos iPhone. Usted entra ahí, usted busca el Sol Networktv, baja la aplicación y ya no tiene prácticamente en sus manos, en su celular. Así que ya lo saben. Bueno, sin más preámbulo, en el día de hoy, pues, yo quiero presentarles a ustedes. Voy a comenzar a hablar inglés a partir de aquí. I need to like to introduce my guest today. He's a candidate for the Osceola County, and he wants to be the supervisor of elections for our county. Let's welcome Ms. Jim Trautz.
Marcos, nice to see you.
Nice seeing you. My pleasure to have you here in my show.
I love it. How did I hear about it? Fiora, who's a candidate for District 3, introduced me to the show.
Well, that's great. You see how word of mouth?
Yeah, word of mouth gets around.
Gets around. So, and that would be a good advice for your candidates.
That's still the best form of advertising.
That's right. Did I pronounce it right? Trautz?
Trautz, like two fish.
Oh.
Trautz.
That sounds interesting.
It's very, very German.
Okay, where are you from?
I'm originally from Chicago. Lived there until I went in the Navy. I served 22 years in the Navy, and then retired. Moved to Virginia. I was in Virginia most of the time in the Navy. So I lived there for a number of years, and then we moved down here permanently about 3 years ago.
Okay, so that sounds good. What made you move to our county?
So when I first came in the Navy, I went to boot camp here in Orlando. And then I attended school down here for the Navy and did a little bit of teaching down here. And we loved it so much that we decided to stay here for good.
That sounds great. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we normally divide this interview in two parts. We'll talk about a little bit about personal, so that you get to know your candidate, you get to know the person, you get to know who he is, what he stands for in terms of personal life, and then we're going to go into a little bit of politics. Then we're going to talk about what's going on in the county and what made him get into the supervisor of elections candidacy. So let's talk a little bit about you. Let's let the people know who you are. What's your family? What do you normally do? What is your day-to-day operations? What do you do in your personal life?
Day-to-day operations now is running for election.
Okay.
But I'm married. We're a blended family. We have 9 children. We have 5 boys, 4 girls. We have 7 grandchildren and 2 more on the way.
Wow.
So that's where we are. As I mentioned earlier, I'm originally from Chicago area. I joined the Navy, spent more than 20 years on active duty in the Navy, been retired, and now I'm a real estate agent. So that's what I do.
Okay, so that sounds interesting, and that's a good base for you to. How do you get to be so community oriented, people oriented? Because I'm always saying every time I hear somebody getting into politics, somehow you have to be like people-oriented, community-oriented. You like helping. You like doing things for your community, getting your community at a better stage, and as in what it is. And what made you come into politics?
So my wife and I,
from a veteran, which is we're talking about, and then going into politics. What made you get into it?
Okay, so I think like most people, I don't think anybody intends to get into politics. I think a lot of times what happens is they do it by accident. We had a number of kids.
You did it by accident?
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. When you have a lot of kids, your kids are involved in a lot of different things. We had kids that were involved in school, so we were involved in school board meetings. Our kids were involved in the community, so they played softball, baseball, football, all those different things. We were actively involved in our church. In fact, I'm an ordained minister, so we're involved in that. And as time goes on, there's things that become important to you, that become important to your family, and so you tend to gravitate towards those different things. My wife and I have always been involved in our community. I currently sit on our HOA board right now in the Oaks. My wife sits on our CDD board. We've been involved in a number of nonprofit things that we have done in the different areas that we've lived. And so as time goes on, the things that you tend to gravitate towards are the things that pique your interest, and then the more that happens, the more you get involved in politics. We got involved because school was a big issue with us. With 9 kids, with grandkids, it's a real big deal to us to make sure that our kids are being taught the right way, that there's nothing going on that we don't want to have happen, that the values that we believe in are instilled in our kids, and that nothing nefarious is happening inside of the schools, and that the things that they're supposed to be taught are the things that are actually taught. So all of that happens, and that's how we got involved to begin with. So
that's good. My question was because sometimes you get a little bit concerned when people move from a big city, from Chicago, to a small town like Kissimmee. So what are you doing here?
Well, I don't know if I would call Kissimmee exactly a small town these days.
Well, it's growing. It's growing. Because I got here from Miami in 2000. Yeah. And we still had cows walking around there. Right. Osceola.
Well, I remember back in the 90s coming down what was the Orange Blossom Trail then, but it's now John Young Parkway,
right.
And there was a big difference in what it is right now. So I remember that. To answer your question, what got us involved here? Mm-hmm. My wife and I have always been involved in politics, and so we started looking at some of the things that were happening in Osceola County. We did not count on the traffic that we saw going on here. We had some issues inside of our homeowners association, and so we started asking questions. And when we didn't get answers, we started digging and trying to find things out. And when you start doing that, people tend to take notice of what you're doing.
Exactly.
So when we got involved in our HOA, people started taking notice of who we were and what we were doing. And what really piqued our interest was the elections and the way they're done here, because they're done different in every state. And Chicago is different from Virginia, is different from here in Osceola County. Mm-hmm. And so what got us involved is that we started seeing some issues that we had with our elections here. We saw where mail-out ballots were going out with party identifiers on it. It didn't happen just once, it happened twice. And my wife and I were involved. We started a voter integrity group here in Osceola County that eventually got morphed into a couple of other groups, but that's kind of what got us started in what's going on with the elections around here.
Right. When you mentioned something didn't look good.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the ballots being identified with political. What are some of the main problems that you encounter that made you decide to run for supervisor of elections?
So, first of all, just to kind of clear the air, it wasn't an office that I sought out. We were concerned, we were involved, but people asked me to run based on background, based on what we've done before. The issues that concerned us was back in August of 2022, we had the issue with the ballots going out with the party identifier on it. And then during that same time, there's a thing called logic and accuracy testing that's supposed to be done on the machines. And that allows ordinary people like you or me and party officials to go in and look and just observe what's going on with the machines before they go out to the voting locations. Mm-hmm. My wife happened to be the designated person for that, and we were denied access for that back in 2022. So
2 years ago.
Yeah, so not only were we denied access for that, but we had the party identifier problem going on. And then last year is where it really picked up for us. It became a problem. In October of last year, again, the mail-out ballots or mail-in ballots went out with the party identifier
so
on it.
It's a systematic problem going on.
Yeah, it's a process problem. It's a systematic problem, and we became very concerned about that. I mean, that's just a big issue for us. It's something that shouldn't happen, and the reason for that is, let's just say that you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, okay? And let's say I'm a mail carrier. And so your ballot goes out and it's got a D on it for Democrat. Well, what happens if I'm a Republican mail carrier and I'm an activist? I see those things going out and You never know what could happen. It's not to say that anything did happen. It's to say that there's the possibility that something could happen. So that's one of the big issues that we've had and we saw here.
But if that system hasn't been resolved, there's not a solution for that yet, and you're going on election in a few days, don't you think that might affect you? If that hasn't been corrected yet?
Well, here's what happened back then. So what happened was the Secretary of State cited our Supervisor of Elections formally and said that you need to take corrective action to make sure this doesn't happen again. And she was required to submit a plan in writing within 10 days to the Secretary of State saying this is what we're doing to make sure this doesn't happen. And on top of that, in the special election primary for House District 35 last year, the Secretary of State was going to send some people in to oversee her actions to make sure those things were being done. Now, I don't know if any of that ever transpired or not. We've been asking, we haven't been able to get answers, but assuming it was, then that problem should be taken care of now.
Okay, well, we hope so, because we need to be a transparency.
Yeah.
An election has to be transparent.
Absolutely.
Totally, because
Absolutely.
I mean, we go out there to vote, and we expect to transparency has to be there, because then we're not going to be trusting our system, and that's exactly what we need to trust our system. And if we go ahead to the ballot and then if we put this vote for this person, I don't want to tricky things going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want things to happen the way it's supposed to, because I mean, it's the people's voice when they go there to cast their ballot.
Yeah, and by the way, the Office of Supervisor of Elections is, we don't make laws, we don't create policy. Our job as a constitutional office is to follow the law. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you're conservative, or if you're liberal. I mean, it's all about election integrity, making sure that it's done equally and fair for everybody. And when we talk about election integrity, we're talking about three things, really.
Really important.
Yeah, we're talking about transparency, making sure that everybody knows what's going on, making sure that the process is accurate and that the people in charge are accountable for the process, and then making sure that voters know where to go to vote, when to vote, how to vote, and if they're even eligible to vote.
That sounds great. Well, we're going to pause for a minute. We're going to take a break. When we get back, I have about 10 questions that I have already selected and that I'm going to ask you. It has to do with your candidacy, and it has to do with the city, it has to do with the elections next November 5th. So, vamos a una pausa comercial y regresamos en breve.
Vuelve el evento que hace vibrar el Sol on the Beach y todo Kissimmee. Viernes 11 de octubre, celebración del 30 aniversario del periódico El Sol de la Florida y el 7º aniversario del canal digital El Sol Networktv. A puro merengue, salsa, bachata y música urbana. Viernes 11 de octubre, desde República Dominicana, la pureza del merengue, Julio César. Desde Venezuela, el cantante de la salsa, Alex Rey. La bachata impresionante de Vibrato, el Boys. Los urbanos, acá, la leyenda. Llama 787. Aaron, el del traje de metal. El Luni, Elvin y Jared. Jay Químico, Hincho, el rústico. Calibre, la nota musical. Mir Hippo, la presión y muchos más. Viernes 11 de octubre en el Sol on the Beach, la discoteca más grande y elegante de la Florida Central. En el Old Town de Kissimmee, a partir de las 7 de la noche. 30 aniversario del periódico El Sol de la Florida y 7º aniversario del canal digital El Sol Networktv. Y tú tienes que estar ahí.
Ok, bueno, aquí regresamos una vez más con nuestro invitado. Él es el candidato a la supervisión de elecciones acá por el condado de Osceola. So we're back here with our guest, his Jim Trautz. He's the candidate for Osceola County Supervisor of Elections. So let's go for salute. All right. I want to get you comfortable because we now have some.
Yeah.
Yep. When I get you comfortable, because I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, let's start with the first one. Probably in this informal conversation we already had, maybe you have answered some of them, but I'll ask it to you anyway.
All right.
All right, first one goes. What personal and professional experiences have prepared you for the Osceola County Supervisor of Elections?
It's a great question. So I told you earlier I spent more than 20 years in the Navy. When I was inside the Navy, one of the things I did is I was the personnel officer for a couple of aircraft carriers. Now there's 5,000 men. There's 120 different divisions. There's probably 18 to 20 different departments there. And we did everything of making sure that those guys were taken care of. We made sure that they got paid the way they were supposed to, that they got advanced the way they were supposed to, that they got the educational opportunities that they were supposed to, that their families were taken care of, that they got transferred in and transferred out, that they got the correct schooling. There's just a myriad of things that need to get done. I've had the privilege of commanding hundreds, actually thousands of people over my 20 years. So administratively, managerially, from a leadership perspective, I've had that kind of background. Most people will say, well, okay, that's great. That's just the military. What have you done since then? Well, when I left the military, I went to work for a defense corporation. And our section ran the foreign military sales program for small boats. Now, in that position, I was in charge of a defense contract that started out at $74.7 million. It grew to almost $100 million. Wow. We were doing navigation installations. I mean, we were doing a lot of different things on boats, not just here in the U.S., but in 40 different countries. We did that through 10 subcontracted companies that reported directly to me. And so our total staff was probably between 300 and 400 people. So this is, and then, of course, running my own business for real estate has a little bit to do with it too. So what I've done is not exactly the $5.5 or $6 million budget the supervisor of elections has. I've dealt with $100 million budgets. It's not a staff of 19. It's hundreds of people that we've dealt with. And so I feel pretty confident that the things that I've done and the things I'm doing now make me more than qualified to be able to do the things that we have to do inside of this office.
Yeah, with all these qualifications, I think maybe they won't take you. They might think you're overqualified.
That's a fancy word for we don't want you, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about election integrity.
Okay.
I think we mentioned a little bit about that. And how do you plan to ensure the integrity and security of elections in Osceola County? I think I asked that question already, but let's hear a little bit more from you.
Okay. So that's another great question. So honestly, I think the things that we've got wrong, and I'll just name a couple. We've already talked about the ballot issues that we had going on. We talked about about not being able to get in with the logic and accuracy testing. I feel confident that both of those have been fixed, okay? But we've got some other problems that we've seen going on too. Just recently, back in July of last year, there were 2 communities that were annexed from the county of Osceola to the city of St. Cloud. And for whatever reason, those people were overlooked when that property was annexed. And what that means is that for a number of years, the people that were annexed into the county of St. Cloud were not able to vote for St. Cloud people. They weren't allowed to vote for their commissioners and for their city, for their mayor and all those different things. And in fact, they were still voting in Osceola County. So we had 2 issues going on. That's just one of the most recent things. We have ballot boxes, drop boxes that were not being attended the way they should be the last election cycle. But my point in all of that is not to point out the faults of everything that's going on, but the fact that, number one, we've got those kind of faults, and then number two, fixing all those things is a matter of process, of having processes in place, of making sure that people are trained in what they need to do, and making sure that you have a system set up to make sure that these kind of things do not happen. Now, we obviously didn't have that happen because we wouldn't have had these problems. Or we're just plain complacent. Either way, it's not a good thing. So to fix those things, we've got processes in place. I told you before, 3 things that we've got that I think are part of election integrity: transparency, accuracy and accountability, and then education. And there's a plan for each one of those things. So,
Great answer. We're going to go with the third question.
Okay.
Has to do with voter access.
Voter access.
Yes, access.
Okay.
What strategies do you propose to improve voter access and participation, particularly among unrepresented communities?
So here's another issue, and this kind of falls under the education tier of our plan, of one of the pillars. Right now, one of the things that the Supervisor of Elections, and I'll give them credit for doing this, they've got a website that's set up. So if you want information, you can dial into that website. You can get text on your phones, if you're signed up for their website. And that's all great. But here's the problem. What if you're not computer savvy? What if you don't understand text? What if you're someone that's older and doesn't really realize or know how to use a smartphone? Or what if you're somebody that's younger that no longer uses Facebook? My grandson tells me all the time, he said, Facebook is for old people, Grandpa.
Yeah, they're moving into all the technologies.
Right. So where
like TikTok and stuff.
Exactly. So they're going to TikTok, they're going to other places. And so one of the ways to make things more accessible is to reach people where they're at. In other words, let's find out where the younger people are going to. TikTok's a great example. What about the older people that maybe aren't computer savvy or have a smartphone? Is there a way that we can go meet them? I mean, do we use email? Is that obsolete to them? Do we send snail mail? Or do we simply get up out of our white ivory tower and go and visit these people and talk to them about what's going on? At the end of the day, the way to make things accessible to the electorate is to make sure you meet them where they are at. So for you and me, it might be different than somebody that's 21 years old. And that might be different than someone who's 80 years old. And so we have to know where to meet those people at from a technological perspective, and then what we need to do, what's the best way of deploying information to them.
Definitely. This question is kind of similar to the previous one. It has to do with the election technology. With the increasing use of technology in elections, what are your thoughts on the current voting systems used in our county, Osceola? And what would you advocate for? Any changes? Any changes on it?
So, Marcos, if I was a king for a day, I would get rid of all of it. I would go back to paper ballots. I've seen and been to different demonstrations where it's not as difficult as people make it out to be. That's what I would do, and that's what I'd advocate for as Supervisor of Elections. Now, you have to understand, the Supervisor doesn't make laws. We don't dictate policy. We really have very little say in what goes on other than telling people what we think. That's up to the legislators, okay? The fact of the matter is we do have these machines. And I do think that there's a problem, there's a propensity. Whether it's true or not true, there's always a propensity. Anytime you enter a machine or something like that into the system, there's the opportunity for fraud, there's the opportunity for abuse. And to me, all that is eliminated if you just get rid of that stuff. So you can have all the logic and accuracy testing that you want and everything else, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen.
That's right. Let's go into education.
Okay.
How do you plan to educate the public about the voting process, including registration, voting methods, and deadlines?
Okay. So one of the first things that I would do, and again, it's one of the 3 pillars, is education. We need to make sure that we're reaching everybody. And by the way, not just at election time. We have to make sure that we reach everybody all the time. And so one of the things that I would do is we would set up a very robust education program to reach different population groups, different cultural groups, and different areas. Now, how do we do that? There's only 19 people in the Supervisor of Election staff. There is nothing, and by the way, the Supervisor of Elections, by statute, one of their jobs is not to go out and do voter registration drives. It's to teach people how to do it and to make sure that we have systems in place to register people. It's not to go out and do it. So if you want to reach the most people, how do you do it? You get the people that are most accessible and the people that are most important in the community. You reach out to the Democrat Party, you reach out to the Republican Party, you reach out to leaders in the Hispanic Coalition, in the Black community, you reach out to these different people, you educate them, you talk to them about how important it is, and then you ask them to come in and join in with you. See, this doesn't have to be a one-way show where it's a supervisor elections and there are 19 people. There's no reason why you cannot and should not incorporate the community. After all, it's all about our system. So if we can teach those people, if we can get to those people, if we can get in front of people, I think we can have great success in educating the young, the people that are middle-aged, the older people, and people of different cultures and different backgrounds as well, too.
That's good. We're going to take another break. And when we get back, we're going to end up with 2 or 3 more questions before we end up our show. We'll be right back in a minute.
Que hace vibrar el Son on the Beach y todo Kissimmee. Viernes 11 de octubre, celebración del 30 aniversario del periódico El Sol de la Florida y el 7º aniversario del canal digital El Sol Networktv. A puro merengue, salsa, bachata y música urbana. Viernes 11 de octubre, desde República Dominicana, la pureza del merengue, Julio César. Desde Venezuela, el cantante de la salsa, Alex Rey. La bachata impresionante de vibrato, el Boys. Los urbanos, acá, la leyenda. Llama 787. Aaron, el del traje de metal. El Luni, Elvin y Jared. Jay Químico, Hincho, el rústico. Calibre, la nota musical. Mir Hippo, la presión y muchos más. Viernes 11 de octubre en el Son on the Beach, la discoteca más grande y elegante de la Florida Central. En el Old Town de Kissimmee, a partir de las 7 de la noche. 30 aniversario del periódico El Sol de la Florida y 7º aniversario del canal digital El Sol Network TV. Y tú tienes que estar ahí.
Every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Mike is running for Supervisor of Elections here of the County of Osceola. So Mike, my pleasure to have you here. Jim?
Open mic, I'm Jim.
Open mic, Florida, Jim. Jim Trautz. Okay.
Are you nervous?
like the fish. Trautz.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a little issue trying to pronounce his last name, but
Doing great.
Trautz. I'm doing good?
Yeah.
Trautz, okay. Jim Trautz. Jim is for James, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my pleasure to have you here in my show. And let's ask you a few more questions before we come up with the end of our show.
Awesome.
All right. Collaboration with other entities. How do you intend to work with local, state, federal agencies to ensure the smooth operations of elections?
It's an awesome question. You know, when we talk about accuracy of, and that's again one of the pillars of election integrity, accuracy, one of the things that we have to do is make sure that our voter rolls are kept up to date and that people that are registering know what they're doing and that we've got a process in place for doing that. Osceola County is historically horrible at voter turnout. This last time around, we only had like 17 point, I don't remember if it's 2.6 or 2.8 now, I have to go back and look, but we were 64th out of 67 counties when it comes to voter registration. In off-year elections, we do far worse than that. We were dead last in 2022. We were 66th in 2020. So it goes back, and those are all state statistics. That's not me talking, that's what the state says, okay? So increasing voter turnout. Part of the problem with voter turnout is education. The other part of voter turnout is with making sure that our rolls are cleaned up, because it makes a difference in what the percentage is. You have to be able to talk to different people and different entities to be able to accomplish both of those things. For example, if you want to do voter education, and to the supervisor's credit, she does it now, you have to be able to go to the schools, you have to be able to deal with the school system and ask to be included as part of their curriculum so that you can at least educate the up-and-coming people. Up-and-coming students. When it comes to cleaning the voter rolls, there's a number of things that we should be doing and frankly, we need to be doing. For example, Department of Homeland Security's got a database that we ought to be bouncing our rolls against. We can be working with the U.S. Post Office and their change of address database to make sure that our rolls are in place with what they see is going on. So not only is it something that we should be doing, but it's imperative that we be doing it. And I think that one of the reasons we've got issues right now, like for example, we've got some 40,000 people that have not voted in the last 8 years and should be inactive, but are still on our voting rolls. And so what that does is that lowers the percentage amount of people that we're showing as being voter turnout. Mm-hmm. If you get rid of a lot of those people and you do the things you need to do, hopefully encourage them to come back on the voting rolls, then it will change things substantially. So that, coupled with education and working with these different groups, is exactly what we need to do to accomplish both educating people and making sure that our rolls are clean.
Great answer. In terms of budget management, how will you manage the budget for the Supervisor of Elections office, especially in times of economic constraints?
Well, I think what you need to do, first of all, is take a look at the need of what you're trying to accomplish. I'm a military guy, and so to me, it's all about mission, 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 about doing what needs to be done. If you need more money, you shouldn't be afraid to ask for more money. Osceola's got plenty of money. That's not the issue, okay? Mm-hmm. The issue is where we use it and how we use it. Now, some people would say, and I know that we just went through and we did this, where in the 2025 budget, the current supervisor cut the budget by $1 million. Well, that looks good on a resume, and everybody's glad to hear that you're cutting a budget, but when you're finishing dead last in voter turnout, and you're trying to educate people, why would you be cutting the budget? My experience has been in the military, in the corporate world, in the nonprofit world, that your budget needs to equal what the mission is supposed to be. In other words, if you need money, Ask for it, justify it, of course, but ask for it, okay? If you don't need it, then let somebody else that needs to be using it use it. But you have to be able to justify what you're doing, why you're doing it, and you can't be afraid to ask for it. So that's how budgetary things should be working. It's not based on, just dollars and cents, it's based on mission.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about future initiatives.
Okay.
Are there any specific initiatives or improvements you plan to implement, if elected, that would enhance the electoral process in Osceola County?
Yeah, I can tell you one right off the top that I would love to do, and we're gonna do it. And that's the idea of giving people out. It falls under transparency. It's the idea of making sure that people from the outside can see what's going on the inside. And what I mean by that is when we have our canvassing boards, you could show up right now, you sit behind a glass table, and you might be able to look in. My question is, why can you not see what's going on? Obviously, you can't, you're not supposed to see personal information, but why not be able to have a live feed that goes to Facebook, that goes on to maybe YouTube, that goes on to different social media platforms, where you as an individual can see what the supervisor is saying to the canvassing board, what the canvassing board is saying to each other, how they're counting the votes, what's going on with them. I asked that question. I was told, there's a lot of legal problems with doing that. Well, Orange County just instituted that. I don't know how they got around the legal issues, but we're not able to do that. So that's one of the things that I think is most important. I also think it's important to let people see what goes on. There's this big perception about a lack of voter integrity, and that there's the process is eroding, and maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. The fact that we have that perception is a problem. So why not invite people in and let them take tours? Let them see from the time that a ballot is received from the voting station, where it goes to, how it's handled, how it's secured, what happens from there, and let people see the flow of what goes on. That would make me feel a whole lot better. I don't know about you, but
definitely, yeah.
if I could see what's going on.
Totally.
So under the issues of transparency, those are two of those things. One of the other things that I would do is to create an advocacy group, an election advocacy group where we bring in people, as we talked about before, from different communities, and I want to hear from you what you think the problems are. It's easy to sit on social media and type away about all the things that are wrong, but I used to tell the people that work for me, I have no problem with you coming to me with the problem, but I want you to come with the solution as well, too. So the same thing holds true with the supervisor of elections. If there's an issue going on or a concern that we need to know about, let's bring it to a table. So maybe once a month, we get this group of people that we talked about earlier to come together and say, what are your issues? Is there an issue getting records requests? Is there an issue getting with our voter rolls? Is there an issue somewhere else? And let's talk about ways that together we can make something like that work. Because me just sitting up there as the supervisor of elections and dictating what's going on makes no sense. You can't fix something if you don't know what's wrong. And you won't know what's wrong unless people tell you. And the best way to find a solution for all that is to make sure that we incorporate everybody who it means the most to, the people of our community itself.
Well, we heard a lot about Jim Trautz, his views for our county, his qualifications, and you're the one who are there on November the 5th to make a decision as to who you want to be sitting in that board. Trautz, as a final address to our public, tell them why they should vote for you one more time.
Okay, we'll do so. So, as I had mentioned before, there is an eroding of the process, or at least a perceived eroding of the election process. I believe that to be true in some cases. I don't know if it's intentional, if it's not. I think maybe in some places it is, other places it's not. But the fact that there's a perception out there means that things need to change. So when we talk about election integrity, by the way, at the bottom of every one of my personal emails is a tagline that I use. It says, you can never go wrong by doing the right thing. And when we talk about integrity, The definition of integrity is doing the right thing even when people aren't looking. So I'm going to strive and I'm going to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that every part of the process, of the electoral process, is transparent to you, to everybody that's inside of this room. We want to make sure that things are accurate, and we're going to need to involve people in order to be able to do that. So that's another thing that we're going to do. Just as importantly, it's really important that we be accountable for things that go wrong. Listen, people make mistakes, things happen, but you can't blame it on, a vendor, for example, like we did when the mail-out ballots went out, and everybody was blaming the vendor, and the vendor says, look, I sent it to you 5 times, okay? We can't blame the city manager of St. Cloud for missing something when an annexation problem doesn't get fixed. Right. At the end of the day, the accountability for what happens with the elections in this county rests with the supervisor of elections and nobody else. We will be accountable for that. And then finally, we're going to make sure that we have a robust education program that not only happens just at election time, but it happens all the time. And it's not just tailored to high school kids or to a certain group, but it's tailored towards all groups, all cultures, all population groups, and all ages of people that are eligible to vote. So that's what we intend to do. I would love to have your vote. I would ask you to please vote for Jim Trautz for Supervisor of Elections on November 5th. The last day for registration is on the 7th of this month, so please make sure that you register. And if you vote early, make sure that you get out there as soon as you can. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks a lot, Jim. One more toast before we go.
Thank you so much, Marcos.
My pleasure to have you here in our show. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.